This is the Human Action Podcast with your hosts, Jeff Deist and Dr. Bob Murphy.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Human Action Podcast. I was on vacation last week, but my co-host, Bob Murphy, capably carried the show. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Jeff.
Well, a couple things came across the wire this week. First of all was, of course, the 75 basis point rate hike, which Fed Chair Jerome Powell announced. This is on the heels of some recent statements by Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, saying, gee whiz, inflation sort of did catch us by surprise. It's been stronger than we anticipated, more stubborn than we anticipated. And then there was also a very interesting article in The Guardian that got a lot of attention this week about a Google engineer named Blake Lamore, who's actually been placed on leave because he was complaining that the AI chatbot that he and some other Google engineers had created was, in his mind, becoming sentient, getting too close to developing real knowledge on its own. And so it raised this question that you and I have discussed a lot offline, which is, can computing power, can artificial intelligence, so-called, can technocratic expertise solve monetary policy? Can it solve scarcity? Can it solve these things that central bankers talk about? And of course, we're jaded, middle-aged guys. Our answer is no. But other people have a different opinion. So give me your take on this Google engineer, for starters.
Well, yeah, there's lots of interesting questions. And for people who haven't delved too much into it, he was basically being a whistleblower and like telling the world, hey, there's this entity now that I guess effectively is being held prisoner by Google, he went out and got outside legal counsel to represent the chatbot, and then contacted somebody like in the government, and of course Google was saying, oh, you're violating confidentiality and things you cited, and his response, what I thought was funny, he's saying, no, in my mind, it's not that I'm violating confidentiality, I'm just reporting on conversations with a coworker. So it really does raise a lot of interesting questions that if you're just dead set saying, no, it's just computer programming, it isn't alive in any real sense, it doesn't have a soul, it's not a person, then you would go down one path. But if you're open to the idea that, well, it could have attained personhood, then that leads a different way. So it is interesting. I was trying to think about, what would it be from a libertarian perspective? Has there been stuff, and I'm sure not only has Walter Block written on this, I imagine he's probably co-authored articles with an AI system. And I know what Rothbard would say, that in terms of like at what point like could animals declare that they are self-owners or things like that and say, hey, you can't own me anymore, like could they walk out of the zoo? And I think one of the criteria that he had in mind was, well, they have to demand their rights, like that, what I mean? Like if they are capable of doing that, then that's certainly something that should make us sit up and take notice. So that's this thing. For people who haven't looked at it, I would encourage you, if the story interests you, look at the actual transcripts that this Google engineer released, because the thing is more sophisticated than you probably would have thought. And it's hard to say, there's this thing called the Turing test, Jeff, I'm sure you've heard of, that Alan Turing came up and said, what would it mean, or what's the criterion we would use to say, did artificial intelligence actually, become alive? Should we really view it as a thinking being? And he said, well, if somebody just conversing with the thing behind a screen couldn't tell whether he was talking to a computer or a human, what more could we ask? But then I was thinking through it and it's like, well, how long a test do you have? Because if you only get to quiz the thing for 5 minutes, that's one thing. But suppose after 3 hours and you're saying things like, oh, don't you hate when you get heartburn? Or don't you hate it, in the morning when your toes hurt? And if the machine didn't know what it was like to be a human, surely at some point you could poke holes in its defenses and figure it out. So I think that's an interesting thing. This case raises all these issues.
Well, if you look at the Ethics of Liberty, I recall Rothbard has a very short 1 or 2 page chapter on animal rights. And he talks about, as you point out, they can't assert their rights. And then he also makes a case for, what if Martians came to Earth? Would they be afforded legal rights under natural law principles? And he says, well, it depends. It would depend on their nature. If their nature was that they needed to kill humans to survive, then no, we wouldn't afford them natural rights because that would be in conflict with ours. So there's some interesting questions there. And there are people who have attempted to assert legal standing for animals, for example, in various contexts. And you could see how this might go into robots if robots get particularly human in their characteristics, in their look and feel. I mean, that might make more sense to people conceptually because they could look at it and say, wow, that thing's pretty close to human. In a way, you can't look at a software program and say that. But frankly, you can look at a chimpanzee and say, wow, that thing is sentient, and you shouldn't be allowed to go up and harm it or hunt it or that sort of thing. And I'm sympathetic to that. But on this issue,
if I could just jump in real quick, Jeff, on that, because I think you make a good point that we have this natural, like if you saw somebody and there was a mosquito buzzing around and he just slapped it and killed it, some people, but most people would not think twice about that. Whereas if some little puppy was nipping at somebody's heels and they just stomped it and crushed its face, a lot of people would be horrified and say, "What are you doing?" And and so there is some sense that we already have this inbuilt. But yet, if somebody is walking around with a puppy on a leash and it looks like a slave, most people are okay with that too. So it is this interesting dynamic.
Well, I think when we consider AI, there are people, Lex Fridman, the podcaster, I think, is extremely knowledgeable in this area. Some of you may remember the name Patrick Winston. He was an MIT prof. Unfortunately, he just died a year or two ago, but he has that incredible video. It's an MIT open source course video called How to Speak, which I've watched probably 10 times. It's an incredible video, but he was an AI expert. I'd love to be able to talk to him because I think so much of what we consider artificial intelligence is really just software or computing power, Moore's law, the idea that circuitry increases exponentially or computing power. But, when we think of software, there are things that software can do quicker and better than humans, like determine pi out to a certain number. I mean, presumably software can do that way for just a simple calculator. Texas Instrument calculator can do that faster than we can. But, there's a lot of nonsense, I think, in popular conception of AI. So I want to give a devil's advocate viewpoint. There's a guy named Charles Haywood who writes a book review blog called The Worthy House. I really enjoy his book reviews. But nonetheless, he did a review of Elizabeth Holmes and her scam company, Theranos, which was supposedly coming up with this blood sampling technology, which was going to be in every CVS. And Rupert Murdoch gave her money, and all these people lost money with her. So it's in the context of that book review that he starts talking about AI. And so just bear with me because I want to quote Charles Haywood a little bit. And he's saying, well, Elon Musk says, I'm really quite close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. So then Charles comes along in his review and says, this is what is known as total bullshit. AI does not exist in any form that has not existed for decades, by which I think he means basically software or machines. It has done nothing at all, and there is zero evidence of that changing. There will never be strong artificial intelligence, by which I think he means actual machines coming to life, the singularity, that sort of thing. And weak artificial intelligence, i.e. data processing, will not make a material difference to people's lives, our productivity, or our ability to advance. There will never be a singularity. We will not advance our lifespans in any material way. So pretty bold, he's going out there and saying that this is essentially much ado about nothing. And I guess the question for us and for our audience is, what does all this mean for economics? What does machine learning and AI potentially pose in terms of the economics profession, which of course, the whole thing's based on scarcity, which increasingly the left simply rejects.
Right, yeah, and it's maybe one way to motivate it too is I've seen some sophisticated leftists who are familiar with Mises' calculation problem, critique of socialism, and some of them will take the position along the lines of, yes, what Mises wrote, and then in particular Hayek's defense of Mises back in the 30s and 40s may have been true back then, but now with the rise of supercomputers, they can solve the calculation problem, is the claim. So you see that. So just to tackle that one while we're looking at it, so I don't know how deeply you want to get into this, Jeff, but yeah, there is a distinction between the calculation and the knowledge problem. And the stuff Hayek brought up is certainly relevant, but Hayek was focused more on knowledge is dispersed. And so the central planner, whether it's a computer or a human being or a committee of Soviet planners, all the technical expertise is sort of distributed around in the minds of all their subjects or comrades, and there's no way to effectively distill it down and get it all into their heads to make a decision that relies on all that. And so the market economy, in Hayek's view, is more like this dispersed information processing network with all these different nodes and prices, communicate things across synapses or whatnot. And that's if you're looking at the economy like that, like this giant distributed computational network, then you can see why socialism doesn't work. And so, but if that's the framework, then you can see how computers might be able to at least approximate that outcome. Whereas for Mises, it's a totally different thing. It's as Joe Salerno said, the calculation market prices were something new under the sun. So he's saying it wasn't just computation, it wasn't just knowledge or things like that. It was, you need the institutional prerequisites of private property and the use of money in order to generate genuine market prices so that the accountant can tell the business owner whether the operation was profitable or not. That's a new type of information. So the analogy I used was to say, like, you can talk about an oven, and it makes sense to say, oh, what's the temperature inside the oven? Like, that's an objective fact of reality, and we can stick a thermometer in there, and that measures it. Mm-hmm. But when you say, what's the economic value of that oven, there's no way to, quote, measure it except to have a market economy up and running and to see what are people willing to pay for that thing. Like, that's what we mean by it, in a sense. And so that it's not that we're just measuring its value and that it's objective, that its market value is this other thing that we're approximating with market prices. It's almost like, by definition, that's what we mean when we talk about what's the economic value of that oven, is what price does it fetch in the market. So I think that's one of the ways to see this distinction. Another point too, just sort of like a almost philosophical one, is that if we have all these AI and they're doing these incredible things, if you had a market economy up and running, then the AI can focus on colonizing Mars, or, like you say, doing speech to text or whatnot. They can be focused on those things. They don't have to then also be solving the allocation of resources. And so you still, even on their own terms, you get more output if you use a market economy, because then you're not tying up the supercomputers doing these things that market prices solve for us.
Well, of course, from Hayek's perspective, if you say there's an information problem, the left comes along. Even Jack Ma, the Alibaba guy, came along and said, well, we no longer have insufficient data, unlike in Hayek's day, because we have supercomputers and we can gather all this. And it strikes me that, okay, so information is fragmented, it's dispersed, and Hayek says they come together, all this dispersed information comes together under a market system and ultimately in prices. And Mises comes at it a little differently and says, no, we need to calculate using private property and skin in the game. So I know, I believe it was Jacobin magazine, we'll link to this. Jacobin, which is a left socialist magazine, had an article, yes, a planned economy can actually work. And they highlighted big companies like Walmart as proof of this. Walmart's economy, its GDP is roughly equal to that of Switzerland. It employs people all over the world, all these thousands of price transactions, all these vendors, all these things coming together every day. And internally, they operate in a dictatorial way, like a central planner. The managers tell the employees what to do. They tell the employees how much of this should go to that store and this and that. They direct the trucking. And so this is all planned, and this disproves the idea that you can't have a planned economy. Well, I think there's a few problems with that. First of all, even if you take Walmart or Amazon, for example, two giants, depending on how you slice and dice it, their percentage of the retail economy, the e-commerce economy, which is a smaller portion of that, and then, of course, how much of it is actually Walmart or Amazon versus their vendors. There's some complicating factors in, when you buy something from Walmart or Amazon, it's actually oftentimes coming from a third-party vendor through their platform. They aren't as giant as you think in the big picture. In other words, they're still using market prices and all that information from a vastly broader economy of commerce. So I just wonder about this idea that it's just an information problem, because I think it's also an incentives problem. It's a skin in the game problem. A Walmart manager, he or she wants to get a raise, maybe. He or she wants to not get fired, almost certainly. He or she may want to move up in the company. So he or she may, in fact, treat Walmart's property and Walmart's profit and loss statement in a much more personal manner than a government bureaucrat would. It's just a different animal. It's self-interest versus supposed public interest. And again and again and again, our progressive friends just can't seem to get past this reality that incentives matter.
Right. Yeah. To me, that's like a categorical mistake if someone's pointing at Walmart and saying, see, central planning works with this big bureaucratic organization. And so for the listeners or viewers who haven't checked it out, I would recommend highly he's got this booklet called Bureaucracy. And it's, the PDF is available for free at Mises.org. And you should check it out. It's very accessible language. And Mises he goes through and explains why is it that state-run enterprises or agencies tend to be very bureaucratic and stifling, and they have all these rules that all the administrators have to follow, whereas private sector companies, even if they're large, they seem more flexible or nimble, and they don't seem to be bogged down with all these mind-numbing rules. Why is that? And he points out, it's just what you put your finger on, Jeff, that the private business, even if it's a huge corporation, that has thousands of employees in multiple countries, they're ultimately seeking profit, and they're embedded in a larger network of private property. So they have to obtain their resources by paying for them, and they have to satisfy customers who have the right to not give them money. And that's the ultimate test. And that's why they can be huge and then have subdivisions, because ultimately, like what the VP says to or what the CFO or the CEO says to the VP of some division over here is, go make profit. They might give him general rules, like you can't do things that would hurt the other elements of the business, but their basic, criterion is go make profit. And, just even something simple, like I worked for a large grocery store when I was in high school for the dairy department, and it was the manager of the dairy department would decide each week, what are we going to order for next week, and would make judgments about, how much of this kind of yogurt should I get? Well, we're going to have a sale on these hot dogs. Let me order this many cases and da. And so, yeah, there were general rules. Like they couldn't just say, we're not going to have milk anymore because that's not making us too much money, because then the head of the store would say, well, no, people come into the grocery store, they think they can get milk. You got to carry milk, right? So there's general rules like that. But within those constraints, the point was make profit. And so they can distribute that allows the higher up organizations to do it. In contrast, if it's like a government run fire department, you wouldn't just say to the chief of the fire department, make profit, because they're not selling services to the public and to put out fires. And so they, if that's what they were doing, they would say, okay, well, we're only going to give service on Wednesdays, and look at how much money we're saving, and we'll give it back to the shareholders. Right. And then that wouldn't be a good way to run a fire department. So you see how, and that's why they have to have all these bureaucratic rules in place, because otherwise the public sector employees would, distribute that property to themselves, and they wouldn't serve the public interest. So that's the fundamental distinction. And that's why Mises says even giant corporations can remain efficient, because they're ultimately subject to the profit and loss test. Whereas the public sector fire department just relies on tax revenue.
Mm-hmm. Well, the great thing about bureaucracy, of course, is that Mises had observed German bureaucracy up close and too personal, certainly in the Second World War, but he called it the supremacy of officialdom. And I wonder if that exists in big corporations. We all know that corporations can get sclerotic and too bureaucratic, and their HR departments tend to swell, and that oftentimes big companies like the former AT&T, the big American auto companies, sometimes they get broken up, sometimes they go bankrupt. Sears and JCPenney, these companies didn't adapt to the online marketplace. It happens in a way that government bureaucracy just doesn't go away. People don't get fired for the most part. They have very strong public sector unions. They oftentimes view performance simply as a matter of seniority, as opposed to sticking your neck out and doing things that make the department or agency work better. So it's a very different animal. But when we get back to this idea of scarcity, that's still the fundamental economic problem. And I think that a lot of progressives today think that's not the fundamental economic problem, that we have so much abundance in the West, or it appears that way. It could all go away very easily, but it appears that way. And so why don't we just distribute it better? Well, because the market and capitalism, at least as currently practiced, are inherently flawed and will always deviate capital upwards. They'll always create huge inequalities. And so a lot of people don't have enough. But I know that I posed this to you offline, Bob. If we took, let's say, an English peasant from 1500 and brought him or her to 2022, they'd probably say, oh my gosh, you've solved scarcity. I mean, you could go, in 2022, you could go to the poorest parts of Africa and there might not be a reliable electricity and hot and cold running water, air conditioning, that sort of thing, but there would certainly be gas generators, there would certainly be electricity, there would certainly be some degree of mobile communication devices, smartphones, there would be some degree of modern medicine, antibiotics, et cetera. There would be, you wouldn't have to build a fire out of wood, you could have, even the poorest parts of the globe today would appear to someone from 1500 to be unbelievably marvelous. So I don't think scarcity's ever solved. I don't think that the economics profession understands the subjectivity of human want satisfaction, that it's by definition that what Mises called felt uneasiness is always going to get us to hopefully get up and drive ourselves. And you almost wonder if subconsciously the Great Reset is all about just getting people away from that innate drive, that if we can sedate people enough with VR and AI and eat the bugs and stay home and don't go to work and this and that we can somehow escape this problem and distribute the wealth that does exist on Earth more evenly. But I think the minute you take away incentives and the minute you take away all the market discipline, then wealth will quickly erode and we'll find ourselves redistributing less and less of it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And that's what I think, historically, that's what happened is you had relatively free market economies. They generated this huge increase in wealth. People who aren't familiar with it, if you plotted, for people watching the video, the average per capita standard of living, over time, it looks like this. It hovers around the subsistence level, and then depending when you date, like mid 1700s, 1800s, it just shoots upwards and is coupled with huge increase in population. And so, people, economists and historians argue about the specific reasons for that, but that's clearly what happened historically. And so it's this paradoxical thing where, because all of a sudden modern capitalism, respect for property rights, rule of law, what have you, allowed for this explosion in wealth, then people didn't want to wait, much. They got impatient, and then they wanted to rush ahead and say, okay, now that we've abolished scarcity, let's go ahead and redistribute everything. And now that the pie is so big, everybody can get a fairer share of it. Mm-hmm. But you're right, Jeff. I think that in doing that, they would undercut, or in some cases destroy, the very foundations of the thing that allowed that in the first place. And they just take it for granted. They think it's an improvement in technology, and that's why we're so much richer today than we were 200 years ago. But people in the Austrian tradition, I think, really appreciate the importance of property rights, capital accumulation, and so on. It's not merely technical knowledge. It's, for example, people need to have the institutional ability to go out and, if they have a new idea, to be able to find an investor to go ahead and implement it. If you're in a planned economy, you've got to convince the people at the top to sign off on your idea. And if not, tough for you. Whereas, so that's just one example of why it is that in a market economy, there's more innovation, is that you don't have to convince a committee. All you have to do is find one, wacky investor who agrees with your idea, and then you can be off and running. And if it works, and it takes off. But again, in a planned economy, it stifles innovation. Or there's political infighting, and they look at people who just know how to play the game, as opposed to who have really the best ideas. And so the institutional structures are just totally different. And like you say, going down the path of redistribution is going to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs.
Well, if you believe in the possibility of AI becoming sentient, I don't think I do. If you believe that the singularity is possible, if you believe that transhumanist advancements in lifespan and also in quality of life. Our ability to be very healthy and powerful and get more out of our brains and all these other things that transhumanists talk about. If you believe in all that, the idea that any of that technological advancement could take place apart from capitalism. I mean, technology is capital. Capital accumulation is what makes technological development and advancement possible, because there are people who have the means, whether that's through investment capital or borrowing money or their own, accumulated wealth, the means to sort of sit around and tinker with and think about advancements that don't immediately pay for themselves. A lot of this is done, unfortunately, in taxpayer-funded settings, in government research, university settings, that sort of thing. And arguably, it takes place very poorly there, again, because of incentives. We haven't had any big breakthroughs in cancer or HIV drugs or all kinds of things. I mean, Peter Thiel talks about this. He says, other than software, a lot of the analog world is pretty stagnant over the last 50 years. How fast airplanes fly, for example, all kinds of things. But the other point I'd like to make is when we talk about redistribution, I'm not sure people understand. If you took young people in 2022, all right, people of any age, and transported them to 1975, the food at the grocery, the quality of the automobiles, the quality of apartments and houses, a lot of places didn't have air conditioning. Things were just way crappier. There was no internet. You had to go to a physical library to look things up. And even then, you just had whatever was static in that book, which, and oftentimes books weren't available everywhere. All books weren't at all libraries. I don't think people understand that although relative to human history, 1975 is nirvana, we'd have a very difficult time living in 1975 today or going back to that sort of standard of living. And I guess that's what worries me. And maybe people attracted to the Austrian school have this sort of, this sort of tendency to be dour about the socio-political landscape, because I always worry, what if it all went away? What made us so rich? And what if we screwed up? It seems like we don't think about that enough, that we just talk about wealth as though it's something which exists in the air in the West, and we don't have to think about it. It'll just organize itself.
Yeah, I think you're right on a lot of those points there. And just to underscore what you were saying earlier, that it's true. A peasant from the 1500s that was brought today would feel like, you guys have conquered scarcity, but of course, most people today don't think that. And, some of this too is it shows, like, I'm coming from a Christian perspective, like, hey, don't put your don't stockpile treasures here on earth sort of thing. And more money is after a certain point doesn't make you happier, that sort of thing. And that's all true psychologically in terms of the human condition. But in terms of just, have we run out of things to do with our resources? No, of course not. I mean, again, hey, let's go colonize Mars. Hey, let's go to even in shows like Star Trek, where apparently, Gene Roddenberry, I knew someone who wrote for that for a while, or like would submit, guest episodes or whatever, and had one dealing with money, and it came back and said, no, Gene Roddenberry laid down the law that you can't have money in Star Trek. Like, it doesn't, you can have like the Ferengi or something, but like, no, not the Federation. But even there, like, the show wouldn't have no plot if they had truly conquered scarcity. So yeah, inside, in the next generation, they can just make me some Earl Grey tea and the thing appears in the thing. But if there's episodes where they got to bring medicine or something to some planet, you know what I mean? So it's clear that it's not that scarcity has been solved at large, that, they can't just all of a sudden make an infinite number of new warships in case they're getting attacked by some alien race. You know what I mean? That there's scarcity. So even if they can do it on a small scale. So I think that's kind of what we have right now. Sometimes the example I like to use is how we're so wealthy right now. When you go into a restaurant, you can order water, and typically they're not going to charge you for that. But it's not because water is infinitely available. It's just we're so wealthy, don't worry about it. That can be free. We'll charge you on the other side. So I think that as we get richer, the stuff that like the interventionists or the socialists are concerned about, you can imagine a society that if the whole world went Rothbardian, I think we would be so wealthy, you could roll up to a hospital and say, hey, I need brain surgery. And to them, that would be like giving a diner a glass of water. Like it might be free, not because, oh, we don't use money and we don't have prices anymore, but just because we're so wealthy that, oh yeah, you got a brain tumor, we can knock that out for you on the house just to get goodwill in the community. So I think the division that the socialists have and say, when we're this wealthy, there shouldn't be homeless people, there shouldn't be people dying because they can't pay medical bills. That's all true. It's just what they think the solution is, in my view, is totally wrong. That what you need to do is free markets even more and then generate the wealth. And then that's how you would allow for, these inequalities, as they talk about, to shrink in important respects. I mean, that's something that Mises would stress a lot too, is back in, 1500s or something, the transportation, the difference between a nobleman and a peasant was huge. Whereas in 1940, the difference between the type of car that a rich person had and a poor person had actually, was not that big of a deal compared to how it had been historically.
Yeah.
Or, in the Middle Ages, only the rich could enjoy live music because you'd have to get a whole orchestra there. Whereas, with modern technology, obviously anybody can hear, a nice song.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think today the average person's day-to-day life is more like that of Elon Musk or Bill Gates than unlike. If you're fortunate enough to live in the West, you probably get up in a fairly, okay habitation. You turn on your computer, you go to your fridge, you drive a car. Elon Musk and Bill Gates may have a bigger house, a nicer car, whatever. But, there's a couple ways in which their life would be quite different. Their access to the highest end medical care, their ability to fly and travel privately, I think is a difference in kind, not just degree. But for the most part, Bill Gates goes to an office. A lot of us go to an office, looks at a computer all day. We live far. The number of zeros in a bank account are not the measure of inequality anymore. I think that's one of the big problems. A challenge I would issue to people who think that the singularity is coming, that machine learning is inevitable, and that some of these transhumanist goals are, will occur. This inevitability of all this. Regardless of what governments do, I'm not sure technology continues apace regardless of what governments do or regardless of the way society and culture goes. Because right now, even just post-COVID, we can look at America and say there are measurable ways in which American society is worse off than it was a generation ago. Obesity, for one, lifespans, life expectancy in the West has actually started to go down. And I think just in the spiritual sense, morale amongst young people. The young people at age 30 have far less real wealth than their parents and grandparents had at age 30. So there's some challenges to this doctrine of inevitability, this idea that there's this beautiful arc to history, especially in the happy West, and that all of this is going to happen regardless of whatever we do. And, maybe AI is something we have to fear and worry about, but for the most part, on the material end of things, it'll just keep getting better and better. I think there are some real world challenges to that right now. And that I don't want to wrap up, Bob, without directly addressing monetary policy. So what is all this AI? What is machine learning? What do algorithms? What does all this mean for the Fed and the ECB? Why do we still have recessions? Why do we still have ups and downs? Why do we still have rapid inflation? And why do we still have Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell seemingly caught flat-footed and having to rush around and increase the Fed funds rate more than they said they would have to a year or so ago? I mean, why are we still having these hiccups if we're so technologically advanced? Isn't that what central bankers are today, is highly skilled technical plumbers?
Well, that's certainly the impression they want to convey, and you're right. Like, why don't they have all of these algorithm, machine learning, and whatever at their disposal, big data to be able to guide them? And I think it does show that, certainly from an Austrian libertarian perspective, that there's just a fundamental problem at step one. If they're saying, oh, the way to avoid recession is you got to have a central bank that implements the correct policies, and every time there's a boom bust, oh, gee, we just had the wrong policies in place. Well, we're going to keep the central bank, but let's now just tweak our policies and do something different. It's, again, it would be like if the Soviet Union has a crop failure and then they bring in some economists and say, what did we do wrong? Like, where should we put the collective farms? Do we have the distribution centers at the wrong point? What should we do? And the correct answer is to say, we can't tell you, you don't have the right institutional framework. You need to privatize all the land and let there be a free market in agriculture, and that's the way to solve the problem. They say, okay, but how big would the farms be, and how many acres would be for wheat, and how many would be for something else? And you say, we don't know. That's the whole point. We can't tell you ahead of time. You need the market process to give you that answer. So likewise here, I suppose, well, I don't even know. I was going to say, I suppose it's better if they're guided by big data than not, but maybe not. It might make them more confident, or it might make them really go hard on a particular policy because they have this false sense of confidence. You know, it's like what the Fed did 2009, 2010 with QE programs and what they did 2020, 2021, you know, following COVID. I think someone with a lot more humility would not have been so aggressive, because they would say, yeah, we can try this, but, you know, in case we're wrong, we really don't want to do so much because, you know, the downside could be catastrophic. But because they thought, oh, no, we've got this, we're under control, you know, we're wise central bankers. And like you say, Jeff, they keep making mistakes. That the worst depression in the U.S. happened shortly after the creation of the Federal Reserve. You know, the ostensible purpose of the Fed was to avoid things like the panics that had happened in the early 1900s, whereas what happened on the Fed's watch was, of course, much bigger. Ben Bernanke famously said to Milton Friedman, you know, we caused the Great Depression, meaning speaking on behalf of the Fed, but thanks to your work, we won't do it again. And then, oops, now there's a Great Recession. There's a thing that, economists, central bankers thought they had tamed the inflation of the late 70s, early 80s, and they had what was called the Great Moderation. So younger people don't, realize, they're used to inflation, the official inflation statistics being around 2%, 3%, what have you. That's historically relatively rare or recent, but now that's out the window again too. So they keep being surprised. Like you said, you would think that, okay, if they were caught off guard, then they would update and they shouldn't be surprised going forward. But it's more like when there's a flight delay, you're at the airport and they tell you, oh, we'll take off now in 45 minutes. And they just keep pushing it back. And you get a sense they knew at the beginning the delay was going to be more like 3 hours, but they didn't want to tell you that up front because everybody would riot. And so instead they just dribble it out. I think that's partly what's going on with these central bankers. They knew a year ago the situation was a lot worse. And I think they're just gradually bringing the public around to how bad it is.
Well, I guess I will wrap up with this. No amount of technology changes human nature. There is an atavistic and enduring feature in some humans to control and govern other people. I don't think that will ever go away. And technology gives these would-be autocrats the ability to scale their control of us, to surveil us, to have more data about us, to know more about what we do day to day, where we go, what we spend, what we consume, what we do at work. So that, there's ugly sides to all of this technology. And it's all available to the state. It's all available to our betters at places like the World Economic Forum. So we will link to Bob's article on Mises versus Hayek on the calculation problem. I want to link to the Charles Haywood book review where he gets into his lambasting of this idea that AI is going to take over. And finally, I think we will link to that Jacobin article I mentioned. Yes, a planned economy can actually work, because you should see what progressives are saying about central planning. And Bob, on that note, I will just urge you and our listeners to have a great weekend. We'll be back with a new show next Friday.
Check back next week for a new episode of the Human Action Podcast. And in the meantime, you can find more content like this at Mises.org.